All right.
Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations. My guest today is Michael Rectenwald, who resigned actually as a professor from New York University, and he has very interesting ideas on wokeism, and has written Springtime for Snowflakes and Beyond Woke. Those are the two books that I'm particularly interested in, and many other things. So welcome to Rational Space Disputations, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Francis. Good to be here.
And for people who are unaware of the format for the Rational Space Disputations, what happens is that it's a 2-hour program. For the first hour, I ask the guest questions, and then after an hour, the screens are turned and the guest is able to ask me questions for an hour. And this allows things to be fair, so there's no setup or anything like that. And as well, the guest can kind of follow up on things which were felt not to have been talked about in enough detail, or whatever the guest kinds of interests are. So, Michael, I'm very excited to have you on the program because you have a background in postmodernism, and I have a slight background in it, but I didn't go into it in the same detail that you went into postmodernism. So I'm hoping to learn a lot about postmodernism, which, to be honest, I can't deal with it. I can't get into it in any detail. And you've done the hard work.
Yeah, I guess unfortunately, really.
Yes, but you're a great resource because you kind of have gotten into the details that many of us just don't have the patience to be able to get into. So before we start looking at these variety of things, I was wondering if you could just tell listeners who you are, what your interests are, what you're currently working on, those kinds of things, so they can get a bit of a sense of what you're all about.
Yeah, so I'm a former NYU professor of liberal studies and global studies. And I was at NYU for 11 years, from 2008 to 2019. And before that, I taught at Duke and Carnegie Mellon and Case Western Reserve universities. I'll tell you a bit about the imbroglio that I got into at NYU. But first, I'll just say that since leaving NYU in 2019, I've gone on to a whole other way of being an intellectual, or being a scholar, and that's been about writing books. And I write for the Mises Institute. I write books, I write articles, do a lot of appearances on speaking engagements, frankly. So
what is the Mises Institute, Michael?
It's a libertarian think tank.
And how do you spell that? How do you spell it?
MISES. That's in the vein of Austrian economics.
Okay, yeah.
So I've been doing that, and the way I got out of NYU was that sort of like you, I started a Twitter account. First of all, I was a far leftist. I was actually a Marxist at this point when I first engaged with the social justice left in the way that I did. So I was a Marxist, and but I had some deviant thoughts. I had some deviationist thoughts, I should say. And I knew, I had a premonition, if I was to express these thoughts, that all hell would break loose. But, and that I would actually probably gain some notoriety. But that wasn't the motivation. I just couldn't restrain myself from criticizing what was going on. And so I started this Twitter account called the Anti-PC NYU Prof.
And that's no longer, like, I tried to get into that and that's been suspended.
Yeah, it's now the anti-woke prof.
Okay.
Yeah, they suspended that one. I tried to keep two of them up. They suspended it. Wikipedia will not update it, of course, and it's hard to find unless you know. But
you can't get into, like, all your, because I was trying to get a bit of a sense of your
the tweets,
the kind of tweets that got you into trouble. And
they're all there.
okay, on the anti-PC or
On the anti-woke prof. Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah, they're all there. They're just deep in the history now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, you can.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I'm really interested in like tweets that are, the tweets that are not allowed versus the tweets that are
Yeah.
allowed, and this kind of thing that's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah. The tweets I made were satirical, ribald, and rather provocative, to put it blankly. And so I tweeted about social justice, the many things that were going on in terms of there was a bias reporting hotline instituted that year that really disturbed me. There was no platforming going on. Syllabi, we were now required to put this bias reporting hotline on our syllabi so students could report on us. And there was also no platforming, and trigger warnings. Safe spaces were burgeoning at this point. And, this was in the context of the Trump-Clinton campaign. So I called myself the deplorable NYU prof, mostly out of solidarity for those disdained flyover states dwellers who were so blithely dismissed and derogatorily referred to by Clinton. And but all that was a crime, especially the deplorable NYU prof moniker, but also what I was saying. And to give you a hint of some of the things I was saying, I was talking about, I think you read Springtime for Snowflakes, so some of the tweets are in there. There's I was tweeting about the Halloween costume nonsense, and that you can't wear a Halloween costume for a night, but you can change your gender by day. And the shutting down of speakers, and I was following the news on this. I wasn't just talking about NYU. One tweet that I made was probably, which they used against me, was that I said that Trump was probably going to trigger some of these social justice people to jump out of their dorm room windows. And
you were inciting suicidal.
They said I was actually encouraging my students to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I didn't have any student followers at this time, and I was only making a joke. And this is they're so disingenuous. But anyway, I got asked to do an interview by the student newspaper, by a reporter who said, they really wanted to talk to me because they thought it was unusual what I was saying if I was indeed an NYU professor. So I said, yeah, I'll talk to you, but I wasn't sure I'd go on the record. I ended up going on the record, and I went on the record. I blasted all this stuff. I said that it was insanity, and I mocked the safe spaces. I think I called them the equivalent of pediatric units in the psych ward or something like that. And I was having fun.
Yeah.
And so after that interview appeared, 2 days later, I was issued an invitation to come into the dean's office to talk. And so I said, okay, I think I know what this is about. And so I go in there, and he comes up to me real close and goes, I want you to know that this discussion has nothing to do with your interview or the publicity you're receiving. or your Twitter account. And I said, oh, okay. I didn't believe it. And then,
coincidence.
yeah, what a coincidence. Yeah, this has nothing to do with that at all. And then he says, by the way, do you mind if the head of human resources joins us? Yeah, so I was taken off guard for that, for sure, by that, for sure. And there she comes in. And I said, of course, what am I going to say? No. And so they start to strong arm me into taking a leave of absence. And they tried to make it out to be a matter of my mental health. In fact, he said some of the people some people think that your Twitter account represents a cry for help. So, yeah, it was a cry for help. Get me away from
Yeah,
this.
it was a cry for help.
And
besides, what's wrong with that? Like,
the implication was right. The implication was that I must be crazy for what I was saying.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that too, because you have to be crazy to go up against this beast, this mob that I then faced. Then I was pushed into that leave. There was some things on the line. I was up for promotion to full professor. And I thought if I didn't take the leave that they would deny me the promotion, because it was all in the hands of the dean of arts and sciences, who was actually over my superior of my own dean. It was just a weird setup there. And so I had been waiting since like April for this news and this was now late September, and I still didn't know about this. This was actually maybe October. I still didn't know about this promotion, and so I agreed to the leave. By the way, there was already media about me because of the interview, and then I went. They asked me to have the human resources head of human resources basically shadow me for the rest of the day. Like she'll accompany you to your office, and so she came with me to my office as if there was either some danger to me or I was a danger to somebody else. And
oh my God,
I finally got rid of her. And then I got a call from the New York Post just after she left. And they said, we're following your case very closely and we're very sympathetic with what you're going through here. I said, how do you know what I'm going through? Well, haven't you seen this open letter denouncing you? And I hadn't seen this open letter denouncing me, in fact. If I had known about the open letter prior to this meeting, I might have put two and two together and said no to this leave. But anyway, they said, yeah, there was an open letter denouncing you, and the reporter read it to me, and I was like, oh my God.
And this was, I assume, from all your colleagues, or no? Was
this committee, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group.
Yes, I was reading about that in Springtime for Snowflakes.
Yeah, so this committee denounced me in no uncertain terms. They said I was guilty for the structure and content of my thinking. So I was basically, convicted of thought crime.
Yes.
And she told me, she read this to me and said, I said, do you think there's any connection between this leave of absence, the interview, and this open letter? And she said, are you kidding? Of course there's a connection. They're totally connected. And I said, well, they double crossed me then. Let's run the article. So they ran this article, it went, and then things went basically they went viral. It blew up very quickly. And I started getting all these news interview requests and stuff like that. And it just blew up. Like the story got picked up all over the place. And after the Post published it. So I was now on this leave, and I went away for the semester, came back, and basically, I was shunned by the entire professoriate in my department, which was over 100.
Wow.
And
So you didn't have any, there were no professors at NYU who supported you?
no,
No, none.
there was one adjunct. That's it. That didn't help me at all. And he wasn't willing to be vocal about it.
Yeah,
So,
no, well,
but then
that's another matter. But no one even unofficially
no,
up and said this is terrible what's happening to you.
no, not a word, not a
Oh,
word. And I had good friends there, I thought.
yeah, well,
And then at the end of the semester, I was subject to this email barrage all of a sudden out of nowhere. Oh, it was apparently in response to the fact that I said I was having my book published on all this called Springtime for Snowflakes. And they went ballistic on this, and I got all these blistering emails. And they called me every name in the book. It's all so tiring.
yeah.
The whole 9 yards.
And then you resigned in 2019.
Well, but this was only 2017. So
Okay. They promoted you, so that was
I got the promotion during the leave.
So that's amazing. Like that's kind of interesting that they did that.
Well, yeah, because it would have been discrimination otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's true. They probably
There was no question about that, because look, I had published 3 books in the previous year.
Yeah.
My teaching evaluations were very good. There was no complaints about me anywhere except for now.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're probably aware of the case of Norman Finkelstein.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, he was like outstanding in all these areas, and they just said, no, the way you conduct yourself is at odds with our Vincentian values or something like that. So
yeah, right.
They're able to kind of, even if you're still doing stellar research, if they say you're not, saying things in the right way, often that's done. So that's actually,
that's true, but I had a sympathetic press behind me for the most part.
Yeah.
At least some of the press, at least I was getting positive support. There were some negative ones, naturally.
Yeah.
But after this email barrage, they moved my office to the Russian department. So instead of disciplining these people that called me white short pants, white devil, alt-right, Satan.
And you've seen their email. So this was on their actual
This was on NYU's listserv.
Unlike Twitter, which is, like no one has to look at anyone's Twitter account. It's not part of your job description.
This was on official NYU listservs to the whole faculty and all of the administrators and the staff.
Yeah.
So everybody saw it, and it was a bloodbath. I mean, they were just assaulting me. So, I mean, I never responded in kind. I told them they were just a bunch of, they were just a mob. And, I really wasn't quite sharp at this point. I would have laughed today.
Satire. That's you could use.
What I would do today is, if they called me these names, I wouldn't be the slightest bit alarmed. I'd just say, okay, fine, thank you. Or I might just ignore it. But I replied. Anyway, they ended up moving my office to the Russian department, where they put me in my own personal gulag, effectively, because they wouldn't move my books. I had no secretarial support. I had no access to a phone or copy machine. They put no name on my door. They basically utterly exiled me.
Yeah.
And then, the same thing went on, the same shunning and all that. Then I got a lawyer, and we sued. So we sued them for defamation and libel. And then there was another clause for NYU's responsibility. I forget what the exact Latin phrase was for this. Yeah. But basically, it held them responsible because they allowed this to go on.
Yeah.
And anyway, they filed a motion to dismiss. My lawyers couldn't overcome it or wouldn't overcome it because they were working on a not on a pro bono basis, but on a contingency basis.
Okay.
So they were only going to get money if I won.
Yeah. And they thought
So
they might.
they basically quit on me.
Yeah.
So what I did then was invited Milo Yiannopoulos to speak in my classroom.
Yeah.
And what happened there was a huge outrage. This was 2018 now in the spring, and there was a massive uproar about this. I got all these emails from these student groups, LGBT community, threats from Antifa, all this stuff. And then it was in the news that administrators were sending out messages saying, they put like an all points bulletin out about this. We don't approve, but we can't oppose, we can't stop this because it is academic freedom, although these opinions are deplorable to us, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the mayor of New York canceled my class.
Yeah, I was reading about
Blasio. Yeah. So anyway, but nevertheless, it brought NYU back to the negotiating table and we made a settlement.
Okay.
And
then your resignation was part of that settlement?
Yeah, I had to resign to get that settlement.
Okay.
And frankly, the job, it wasn't ever that great. First of all, you're in New York, which is super expensive. And the colleagues were just a nuisance for the most part. I like the students, of course, mostly.
Yeah.
I never had any problems with any students ever.
Yeah.
But that's the story. And since then, I've just gone into another whole register, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I highly recommend people read Springtime for Snowflakes, and a lot of the the elaboration of these things is in there. But I don't want to, because we've already spent 25 minutes on this, which is great because I think you'll need the background, but I am very interested in your background, your philosophical background.
Yeah.
And you said you were a Marxist.
Yeah.
So what was your view of what kind of Marxist were you? What was your Marxist?
I was a left communist, as it were.
So
yeah.
So what were the tenets of your?
I believed in socialist revolution and the working class and all that, but the Bolshevik revolution was a authoritarian power grab, and the Chinese communist revolution was a bourgeois revolution with red flags. All this crap. It's all, there's all these clauses and conditions, and there's all these little internecine squabbles within Marxism. And these tiny sects. I tried out almost every form of Marxism there was. But I had also like a postmodern theory inflection about me, just simply because I read so much of it, and basically it was part of my PhD work. But I actually wrote in the history of science. That was my actual field of research, 19th century British science.
But like, because I was reading Springtime for Snowflakes, not the entire thing, but I was trying to get a bit of a grasp of what your position was. You don't mention things like the labor theory of value.
So, I do talk about that.
Okay, I must have missed that, but did you accept that? Like,
yes, I did. I did, but in the book I just dismiss it because it's false. It's lunacy. It's completely fabricated. There's no basis for it, and value is not based on labor. Labor inputs.
So what is, in your view, what is value be? But you were arguing that. So there's the time when you were espousing Marxism, and and now you reject that, and you are libertarian, sounds like a libertarian kind of viewpoint. And like the Frankfurt School and all these types, what was your position on them?
Well, I read all of the Frankfurt School. I read, all that. Had a whole course on the Frankfurt School.
Mhm.
I thought they were actually. I thought the Frankfurt School actually opened the door to postmodern skepticism with reference to the Enlightenment and rationality. And I thought, frankly, I thought there was a lot of problems with the Frankfurt School. And now I think there, even more problems with the Frankfurt School I have with it now. But I considered them kind of like they're neo-Marxists, and they abdicated the working class. They gave up on the working class as the agent of change in history, and they cobbled together these identity groups. Really, the new left comes out of Marcuse.
Yeah, I know. E for me. Well, because I'm trying to piece this through. So I don't call myself a Marxist because I think that's a religious kind of thing to do. And in fact, Marx said, "I'm not a." One thing I know is I'm not a Marxist. So he
he did say that.
He sort of understood the kind of doctrinal kind of orthodoxy, that kind of thing. When Marx and Engels saw themselves as being social scientists, actually, and that their views were scientific. It was just the goal. So they had the goal that was socialism, and they wanted to try to reach socialism through scientific processes.
Well, I think Marx said he wasn't a Marxist in the context of the question of whether socialism had to come after capitalism, or whether you could have a socialist revolution before a full capitalist industrial development. And that's why he said he wasn't a Marxist, because although he had held that theory for the most part, for most of his life, it was in the later years of his life when he abjured that theory and said that it wasn't necessary. So there's where he differed with himself, frankly.
Yeah. But I kind of, well, I guess I want to, like, I think there's validity to many of the kinds of arguments that are put forward, but I have a scientific academic kind of mindset, so I don't want to wed myself to anything like I've got to just accept all these words because some guru has put them out. Which I think
the sacred text.
Like I remember when I was doing my PhD at York University Political Science, which is a hotbed of historical materialism to some extent. Anyway, one of my advisors, because I was arguing an evolutionary perspective on history, said Marx would have, like, this is not what Marx said about and I said, well, I guess I'm not a Marxist then. To the advisor.
This is not
that was kind of the thing. So I really find that whole thing where someone will offer you a quote and say, well, this is in disagreement. It's like, no, that's not the point of this. The point is to try to figure out, okay, there's a theory here, and what does the evidence say about the theory? But I'm wondering, because this is something I think, in trying to trace the development from sort of the Marxist position, because Foucault and all these people were sort of flirting, at least, with Marxism.
They're all anti-capitalist leftists. There's no question about that.
But then they went on this strange kind of relativistic kind of path in the 60s. So how did that go from a kind of a scientific socialist kind of idea that was very, rational? Now you might disagree with like the evidence and so on, but it wasn't anti-rational to this kind of anti-reasons, radical skepticism, relativism, and so on that was happening, and the deconstructionism and everything that was occurring.
Well, that was,
and just to finish that, I think Antonio Gramsci was the start of it.
Yeah, I mean, Gramsci started this whole cultural Marxism movement, which you're not allowed to even believe in, because supposedly it's a conspiracy theory. But it exists. It's cultural Marxism. I mean, he effectively argued for a cultural means by which you would undertake the changing of consciousness first through
Yeah,
the opposing the hegemonic ideology and the institutions, and eventually then you would win the minds over of people, and that would bring
yeah,
about revolution. You had to
yeah,
change the subject
yeah,
first.
yeah,
It wasn't very because previous to this, of course, Marxism is very mechanistic and deterministic.
yeah, yeah.
The working class may as well be a cog in a wheel. It doesn't seem to matter what their volition is. And
Well, it's like it's inevitable
yeah,
because of the force
yeah,
of labor. Like it comes out of the labor theory of value and the idea that, you know, the nature of history, which is to some extent, I putting my cards on the table. This is kind of I think this has some validity to it, that production, like
mhm,
if you're looking at the history of humanity, it's production that is the driving force of humanity, is the theory. And it's got a very, very strong economic focus to it.
yeah.
And then when it was kind of interesting because I was at University of Victoria, I did my master's degree at University of Victoria, which is like postmodern. Anyway, I was a fake at the time
Yeah.
because I just knew that my professors espoused this. So I just kind of put together stuff that they would agree
Oh,
with.
I had to do the same thing. I had to do
But
the
I didn't
same thing.
really, I wasn't, you seem to be a much, like you were more of an intellectual than I was at the time. I was just a kind of a neophyte trying to, trying to swim in the waters, whatever. Anyway, one of the postmodern gurus there said, Gramsci was really the only Marxist that mattered because Gramsci thought ideas, like Gramsci took seriously ideas. And so
Hmm.
like, oh, okay, so Gramsci is like the only one to focus on from me. Anyway,
Yeah.
so it was really later on that I thought, oh, that's where it all went wrong, was like this delinking everything from any kind of reality. Like it's
Well,
only the head,
it started with the Frankfurt School with their criticism of rationality, Enlightenment rationality. I mean, they didn't throw out all rationality. They threw out what they called instrumental rationality, and they divided it off from critical rationality, which was basically just criticism of everything,
Yeah,
or as Marx put it, criticism of everything existing.
okay.
But that anti-rationalist bent, I believe, was the bridge to postmodern theory.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
Stephen Hicks says, and I somewhat agree with this, that what it was is when socialism was known to be failing all across the world, and the horrors from the Soviet Union had come out through Khrushchev's so-called secret speech, and the gulag system was being exposed, and the horrors of Soviet, murder really were coming to the surface. That these leftists in France, in particular, wanted to keep leftism alive, but they did not. So they posed this kind of philosophical skepticism and relativism and all that in order to hide their own authoritarian impulses. And my argument is that they were reacting to the failures of communism, especially after the '68 student rebellion flopped and all that. And my theory is pretty simple: that these people were wedded to anti-capitalism, but they saw the kind of the Marxist route as too determinist, and it didn't work. So they tried other tacks, like language and power and various other ways. But it still has the same ethos, I think. It still has this underdogism, I call it. That is this idea that the subordinated that this that the situation is in society and life is a zero-sum game where the powerful dominate, and the idea is to oppose them. So I think like Foucault, for example, he took the Nietzschean notion of the will to power and flipped it on its head, sort of like Marx flipped Hegel on his head, and suggested that, yes, everything is this will to power, but we need to oppose it, because it's the powerful that are the problem. And all this relativism came in, and then with Derrida, the disjunction of language from reality, really, with no better way to put it, I don't think.
Well, yeah, well, it's getting into all these abstractions without any rootedness to anything in reality. Like this is kind of, and this is why I have no patience for this stuff. I can't, I just can't, I can't get into it because I just find it too, everyone gets into all these like debates about all the abstractions when that's really irrelevant. Like it's really the linkage to the actual empirical evidence that's the
Yeah,
important.
they think that empirical evidence is based on it's all constructed by the powerful, and
Yeah.
likewise it isn't. Objectivity is a construct that's maintained in the service of the powerful to overcome, to control and overpower the subordinate or the subaltern or whatever the hell they want to call it.
But I think I disagree with you. I really seriously disagree with you on these matters
Yeah,
because
I think there is a class struggle, by the way,
yeah,
but the
yeah.
class struggle is not between the capitalist and the worker. It's
Oh, yeah.
between the state and the and everyone else. It's the state that is the ruling class, and the state has the power, the arbitrary imposition of power, and they exploit the population.
But what is the other class? So the state is one class. You're saying it's a class struggle.
Yeah.
So
The other class is the non-state actor.
So
Yeah.
that entire thing is a class.
Yeah, the real conflict is not between capital and labor, it's between capital and the state. And the state is the exploiter who takes money for doing nothing at all. Yeah. And that imposes taxes and other means of extracting wealth out of people. They're basically robber barons in organized fashion. And the exploitation theory at the point of production is false, because the idea that value is dependent upon labor time, the socially average necessary labor time to produce a commodity, is just not true.
So why do you think that that's not true?
Because value is is subjective. It depends on what somebody values something as. It's not about you could work for 100 hours outside digging a hole, and it's not going to have any value at all. It'll have a value for you if you want to bury yourself, for example, but otherwise there's no exchange value there. So labor doesn't determine anything in terms of value. Value
this isn't about commodities, though.
Right? Yes, so even with commodities, labor does not determine value. Value is the same as price, and price is really determined by what the next buyer will pay for something. That's really what it's determined by.
But how is it that some people can pay for things? Like, what is the basis of that?
They have money. So,
but how do they, like, this is kind of like money is kind of an abstraction of something.
Well, they exchange something of their own for something else. So they may exchange labor, they may exchange goods, they may exchange whatever, but the point is they bring certain property to the table, whether that's property in themselves or property that extends from their own labor, and then they exchange it in the marketplace. This is what happens. And there is no way, first of all, to ever establish socialism. It can't be done because without prices in the factors of production, there's no way to determine what anything is worth, what to make, how much of it to make, or how to make it. That's one thing. That's the calculation problem, but the LTV, the labor theory of value, is flimsy at best, and it's totally determined by this idea that the average, socially average necessary time to produce a commodity is the value. But Marx actually, and Murray Rothbard takes this apart very well in his books, in particular, his I forget what the exact title is right
So
now.
who is that? Who is the author that you're talking about?
Murray Rothbard. He's a Austrian economist. He's dead, but
yeah,
he showed that in the end, value wasn't even, Marx never was able to define it, and by the time he got to volume 3 in Capital, he wasn't able to define what value was. It was kind of like a ghost in the machine, because it wasn't attached to price. It wasn't the same as price, and it wasn't. It never really did seem to inhere in the object itself. So, you know, I can't remember exactly the takedown, but it's pretty.
Have you read Ernest Mandel's work?
Yeah, I've read Mendel.
He has some interesting things to say about labor, like in terms of like, and on my own, and I find all these things fascinating, and I find them very complex. So I'm still trying to work through them myself, and looking at the critiques of the labor theory of value.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna, like, I'm open to examining it. Like I want because I think that's really what is at the heart of historical materialism, is the labor theory of value.
Yes.
And so whether or not historical materialism is true or not is going to stand or fall based upon the labor theory of value. So
the whole Marxist edifice is resting on the labor theory of value. Yes. The whole theory of exploitation rests on the labor theory of value. So if the labor theory of value falls, so does the exploitation theory. Therefore, so does all of Marxism and everything that it stands for.
Yes. And so my position is that is what we have to get through. And like, whatever, it's a theory, so it needs to be substantiated. And if it's not substantiated, then, well, whatever, you have to think of something new, or revise it or whatever. But what strikes me so much about the postmodernist kind of turn is this is not part of the whole discussion at all.
No, not at all. What
it's gone, like, that's all, like, forget that. It's all about, whether reality is the social construction of reality, and the language games and all these kinds of word kinds of things, and really language, which is very, very difficult. Like, just as one example, Jacques Derrida, who I think is one of the most god-awful theorists ever, he wrote a piece called Spectres of Marx. I'm not sure if you've read it or not.
I haven't read that piece, but I know about what he's saying there.
That is just outrageous that anyone would devote any time at all to this kind of stuff, which is just some kind of nonsensical word games that are going on, not linked at all to the situation of, is the labor theory of value true or false, and why is it false, and all these kinds of questions, which I think is, like, at the heart of the debate. Like, I think my own view is that the debate that has to be had is between basically classical economics and historical materialism. That's the fundamental debate. But it got completely sidelined with all the kind of postmodern nonsense that we've been dealing with since the 60s, which never even allow us to get to that, because we're so distracted by all these kinds of what it seems to be rather, esoteric kinds of matters that aren't really, at the heart of the matter.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But I kind of thought that as a Marxist as well, that there was no grounding there, and but I kind of had to teach some of it, and I taught Foucault, I taught mostly Foucault, I taught Barthes, Roland Barthes and stuff like that, because it was good to teach.
Yeah.
But I would say this though, whatever they theorized about, which I think basically my idea is that leftists are going to left, and they had to stay leftist. And
So what do you mean by we should get that definition. So when you say left or leftist, what do you mean by that?
Well, mostly anti-capitalist. They remained anti-capitalist, and Derrida.
But you can have a right-wing anti-capitalist.
No, Derrida even said that everything he was doing was Marxist at base, even though he dealt with nothing in material dialectical materialism or materialism at all. The project he conceived, he thought, was still part of the Marxist project, and that was because they were trying different tacks to attack the power structure. So
well, just because Derrida says it's true doesn't mean because Derrida says it doesn't mean that's the case. Like Derrida was probably a shyster.
That's how he thought of what he was doing.
So we don't. It could have just been a way of getting people on board with whatever nonsense
that's true.
Embarking upon. But in terms of left, but you can. Do you think that you can? Is it possible to have an anti-capitalist right-wing person?
Yes, indeed. In fact, the earliest right wing or conservatives were anti-capitalists, going back to the
aristocrats.
Yeah, Thomas Carlyle, even Edmund Burke.
Yeah,
these were anti-capitalists. So, yeah, I think in fact,
and as well the pro-tribalists.
Yes, that's true. Then you have a new movement today in the United States. I don't know if it's going on up there or not. There's a new national socialist movement really going on here.
Oh, yeah.
These people like Nick Fuentes, who's basically arguing for like a social welfare state, but only for white people. So yeah, there's right-wing socialism. There always has been.
Well, this gets into the definitional kinds of things, like, and that always intrigued me that fascism called itself National Socialism, which I guess was kind of a socialized system for Aryans. Again, what you're talking about, which goes against the kind of ideal of what most people think socialism is, which is not. It's everyone. It's like it's the society, and you have different races and so on within society. So how can you then be socialist if you only think your socialism applies to white people or whatever is going to be the stipulation that goes on about it?
Yeah, I mean, they just believe that like the Nazis did, frankly, that they're only responsible for those people that are defined as part of the nation state, and everyone else is out, and those people can go do whatever they want if they want to do it in another state or whatever. But the basis was, of course, the Aryans, and they argue now, at least, that they really weren't so much supremacists as they were nativists,
Yeah.
But of course that's.
So we only got 9 minutes left there.
Oh boy,
Michael. George Orwell. I want to talk to you about George Orwell.
Yeah.
So what's your view? So this is one of my major interests right now, is I think Orwell, of all the writers that I know, had some serious insights to provide us with. And Orwell, as you probably know, was a socialist.
Yes, I know. I'll forgive him for that.
Anyway, so I'm kind of I'm toying with calling myself an Orwellian socialist, because I think the socialism that Orwell was putting forward is perhaps where we can reach a lot of common ground with many of the people that I talk to who are not socialists, but are very, very concerned about the existing kind of dynamics that are going on. Orwell said there's two problems with socialism. The first one is socialists, because he thought there was problems with the personalities of the people he's dealing with.
Yeah.
And second was the love, what he called the love of the machine, which
Yeah.
I believe was kind of the planning, the problems with planning and the problems with like a technocratic kind of way of organizing the world.
Yeah.
Which kind of threw out all the more organic kinds of characteristics. And there's a guy who runs an institute here in Canada whose name is Brian Lee Crawley, and he says this is kind of the gardeners versus designers. So like there's certain people who will allow the kind of organic things to occur and not try to manage everything. And then there's the people who want to set out a kind of a blueprint for things. And he's very much opposed to the designers. I think this is getting at this kind of problem a little bit for socialism, which is if you don't have markets, if you get rid of markets,
Yes.
now you've got to have a command kind of economy. And a command economy tends to almost strip away all the kind of kinds of planning kinds of features, and then the kind of you sort of get that sort of gray Soviet kind of type of style system.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, or like.
Well, I think nobody characterizes our present predicament better than Orwell in 1984.
Yeah.
Now, it's arguable that he is talking about that kind of socialist state.
Yeah.
And that he's talking about, and he's trying to give a foreboding, a premonitory shot across the bow that this would end up in tyranny. And I think, and then of course that it would be maintained through all kinds of horrible inversions of reality, and that totalitarianism is marked by this kind of inversion and doublespeak, and war is peace, and so on and so forth. This horrific set of lies, and that it would become institutionalized, and that it would become totally tyrannical. And so I find it to be quite an indictment of a socialist dictatorship, frankly. And likewise, I just don't know how Orwell maintained his socialism in the face of all these particular admonitions that he was making. But
well, I think he saw the injustice, and Animal Farm I think is one of the best poignant kinds of visions of this, is the which is kind of almost makes me very sad when I think about it, which is the horse, the draft horse, who is pulling all the stones to make all the things that are needed, and then in the end they call the slaughterhouse truck to come and take the horse away. And I remember my associates thinking about this, being very sad. And that's kind of the tragedy of capitalist systems, is that the laborer, who no one could live without, like that's like, and this is where the labor theory of value comes into it, is that if we don't have the people doing the work, if we don't have the people producing things, and this is where Ernest Mandel's work comes into it, nothing will exist. So they are the true heroes of humanity.
Well, I just don't believe that there is such a class. I don't believe that that anybody is a draft horse forever. That this is a portrait that doesn't exist, because there is no class that has the same interests, the same identity, the same ideology, the same composition that has the same interests, for that matter. I don't think that there's a class with the same interests. I don't believe in this idea of a common class character. And because I don't think that capitalism is actually like that. It actually allows many people to move up, down, and around all the time. And I know this from my own life. My own fortunes have been, vicissitudinous, from wealthy to very poor, from having nothing to having plenty, from driving Uber to being a professor, to getting paid a lot of money to make a talk. So I just don't buy the class. I don't buy the class character. I don't buy that there's this consolidated group of the working class. And I think history's borne this out by virtue of the fact that never has the working class mobilized as socialism wants it to. And that all socialist revolutions were always elitist projects undertaken by the elite, funded by the elite, and basically imposed on the workers forcibly. So that's the way it's gone on.
This is kind of what Orwell was like. So this is why I think Orwell was so important as a thinker. Is Orwell, and if you read, I'm not sure if you read Homage to Catalonia,
No.
which is also a very, very important book. So like I'm trying to read everything of Orwell because I think really Orwell was and there's probably other thinkers as well. It's just Orwell's probably the most famous one, who is grappling with the difficulties. And I do recognize this, and I don't know. I think it's an open question whether whether socialism is possible or not within the human condition, whether it's just always going to be captured. It's never going to be able to. But Orwell is very struck by the plight of working people and how they were treated so unjustly within the society, and how capitalism does this, and how there's all sorts of structural kinds of problems with capitalism and so on. And in Homage to Catalonia, there's a famous scene where Orwell meets an Italian because they were going off, and that's just the most amazing, because I believe the Spanish Civil War was the first war that was fought on ideology, so on people wanting to bring about a socialist system based upon the injustices of people who spent their whole lives toiling away to have that labor appropriated by people who just sat there accumulating capital and controlling the system against and deploying it against those people. So that system, and he meets an Italian who's a very enthusiastic worker who just has this kind of ideal that as a worker, I am entitled to a fulfilling life. And this is being prevented. I'm being prevented from having this fulfilling life by these capitalists who control the system, and so on and so forth. So that really stayed with Orwell, and his whole experiences in Barcelona at the time, which for a short period of time was a socialist system. And there's like things like tipping. So people would refuse tips and say, no, we don't accept tips in a revolutionary society because it's a demeaning kind of thing where we should just all be humans producing things for one another. So the kind of idealism stuck with him through all the obvious problems that existed, and as well the capturing of the socialist aspirations by these opportunistic, the pigs in 1984, or in Animal Farm, the pigs are they encourage people to, as a way of controlling people, to go along with their system, and then they exert control over it. So these kinds of things he was talking about, which I think.
Yeah, I understand, and I just don't buy the idea that. Well, first of all, I don't see the problem with there being a difference between I don't believe in economic equality. I think economic equality rules out the possibility that anybody can create something, and that, you know, if you try to enforce economic equality, what you end up with is the Soviet Union and China before the 70s, late 70s in China.
Well,
So
like that is one, like, this is the question. Like we don't really know, I guess, is like was the Soviet Union, you know, like a circumstance that came out of like a peasant society that was industrializing very quickly, and all the kinds of difficulties that come with it, or is it really true that you need to have a high level of industrialization for socialism to be a viable kind of system? That's unknown because we've never had that. So it's all kind of theoretically speculative at this time. Like that's
well,
like I think people who say it's never worked, therefore it's never going to work, that's a bit of a fallacy. It's like, you know, when things were aristocratic and people were saying, you know, usury and capitalism is never going to work as a system because it's too exploitive or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure there were people during the aristocratic period who were, you know, if we had, maybe there wasn't a developed kind of philosophical system at that time, but capitalism had never happened as a complete system until about, you know, the 1700s, I guess. But that didn't mean that capitalism was an impossible system.
yes, I understand what you're saying. I'm not talking about I'm not trying to use the past as a proof that it can't exist.
Mm.
My argument is more fundamental than that, and that is, I think that it can't exist because it's fundamentally impossible to set up in the first place, and for various reasons. But one of them being that it has to end up with a state, because there's no way you're going to enforce the lack of a monopoly, was really what socialism is. It's a monopoly over production by one group. And it happens to be the state in the case of the Soviet Union. But it can have other forms too. I call it there's corporate socialism. There's other forms of monopoly, but what socialism has in common with monopolistic capitalism is monopoly, because it's a monopoly system. And that's the main problem that I have with it. And in order to enforce a monopoly, you must use force. You cannot allow people to have property, even in themselves, which is the fundamental property that everybody has a right to. So without property in yourself, you've already set up a tyrannical situation. And that's why I oppose it.
On that note, Michael, we are at the hour point.
Okay,
So
well,
what we're going to do now is we're going to switch it up.
All right.
I'm going to give you the controls, and you can either continue along this vein or you can move into other subjects.
Well, I think this is an interesting subject, because what happened to me was that when I had this social justice mob coming after me,
yeah,
I sort of expected some of the socialist associates that I had to also to sort of support me, because I was arguing against a lot of the things that they denounced, like identity politics and this kind of postmodern social justice, you know, that doesn't have any solidarity, that promotes these divisive identity politics and all that. But they all came after me. So I'm sort of surprised. I wasn't expecting this today, that we would have this kind of conversation, because I didn't know that you had sympathies along these lines.
Oh yeah.
But I'm surprised because you know, they'll come for you. The socialists will also come for you. That's my thought. that they will actually turn on you as well.
Well, I know, like my experience is a little bit different than yours, Michael, because I have quite a large support network. So I don't quite know why this happened, but I have been working a lot in the. So first of all, I was hired in the university as a controversial figure, so I didn't. It was no surprise that I was going to be putting forth views. So I spent my whole time at Mount Royal University trying to build alliances with people,
Yeah.
and to kind of have the view that the most important thing is that we're able to say what we think is true.
Yeah.
Like, that's the most important thing. And it doesn't really matter. And this kind of gets into interesting questions about, you know, what kinds of things are we getting allowed to be said at the university. And I just had an interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with Pamela Lindsay. And this is now a big, huge issue, which I wasn't expecting that to be a part of the discussion either. But now this is a big topic, which is they had at Lethbridge. She's from University of Lethbridge. She was a graduate student there. She's closely associated with Paul Viminitz, who's a philosophy professor at Lethbridge. And they run these dinners where it's called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And they invite, deplorables to the dinner table. And Albert Howard and I were like quote unquote deplorables invited that particular time. And one of the topics is pedophilia another sexual orientation?
Right.
That's a question. And at Lethbridge, which I still cannot believe to this day, they actually had a talk happen in 2018. I think it was 2000 on in defense of pedophilia.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, this is the worst possible. Like, I think my own view is, my gut reaction is, I think these arguments are a justification for child abuse.
Yeah.
That's what I think. But as an academic and an intellectual, I can't stop that. I have to investigate that and see what that argument is. And I can't stop, like, this is the kind of the problem. And the authoritarians say, no, you can't, because by actually allowing the conversation, you are justifying it. Like, which is not true. This is a hill. I do not think this is true. You're not just, by investigating something, you are not justifying it. That's not true.
I agree.
Anyway, so that was kind of my approach for 13 years. And I dealt with people all the time, and everything was always difficult. But starting in 2016, that's when I got, like, people were starting to target me for removal. Like, that was starting to happen. And then, of course, in 2020, with the George Floyd killing, that's when, like, it just, the tipping point was reached, and then it was basically it was over. Or yes. It was not going to be the same again. So I have socialists who defend me. Well, I'm an Orwellian socialist, so I defend all sorts of people all the time who I disagree with. I know other people who at least defend me. Maybe that's because I'm a socialist, and they wouldn't defend the, whatever, all these people.
Right.
In one of the interviews I was listening to you on, you talked about the case of Ricardo Duchenne, or someone mentioned the case of Ricardo Duchenne. Anyway,
I think so.
Ricardo Duchenne is well, it's hard to say because no one can even talk about his ideas because it's like a third rail.
Right.
But
I read about him, and I think I may have mentioned him. Yeah.
But he's like, some people who would defend me would not defend
him. Yeah, I understand, because because he's conservative, effectively.
Well, no, he is. I don't know exactly, but he seems to be up. And this is just, I don't know enough about it because I have to talk to him more about his ideas. he seems to be a supporter of what's called white identity politics.
Oh, see, yeah. Well,
And there's a
that
whole
would
bunch
be,
of Kevin McDonald is another person.
yeah, Kevin McDonald would be definitely in that camp.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like identity politics at all. And so when you were voicing your criticism, so we have something in common. When I came out against the social justice left, I was a Marxist as well. And I was attacking them from the left, from a leftist standpoint. That is left, what I consider to be left of them.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah, so and this came in the Indigenous file. So this was largely about Indigenous politics, but I got there's another number of different issues. It started off as Indigenous politics, but it soon, with the wokeism stuff, which I should say identity politics, that has become totalitarian as well.
Oh, totally.
I understand what wokeism is. So identity politics doesn't have to be or maybe it needs to be totalitarian. I'm not exactly sure, but there was a time when identity politics was not totalitarian. It was just one perspective amongst many. And this is kind of what Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay in their book Cynical Theories, which I think has a lot of insights, called applied postmodernism. So
no, wait a minute. I want to correct something here. I said that first in my book for snowflakes.
They took your ideas.
They plagiarized me without attribution.
Okay. So as Michael Rectenwald
thank you. I'm very sensitive about this because I've been ripped off a lot.
Yeah, well, anyway, so as Michael Rectenwald said, there's 3 stages of postmodernism: deconstructive postmodernism, applied postmodernism, and reified postmodernism. Those are the 3 stages. In the applied stage, postmodernism was just coexisting with all the other all the other kinds of viewpoints, and then it started to become totalitarian. Anyway, in terms of with wokism, I got into trouble mostly about the indigenization thing, which has been my area since 1993, I guess, or so, 1994. But also trans activism, the Black Lives Matter kind of stuff, and Islam. Islam was also a major problem that I was grappling with at the university. But it started with indigenization, and I was actually, when I was hired, I had already was going to be coming out shortly the book that I co-authored with Albert Howard, Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry, which was the most controversial book that we wrote. That, and there's been nothing as controversial as that, because that was a no holds barred attack on all the indigenous kind of stuff that was going on, and it was written very plainly for it wasn't really written very academically, because we actually envisioned the book for the public, not for academics. So it was much more in your face than the subsequent things that were written. Anyway, so indigenization was where it all started. Now, you were asking me about something specific about that, though, which I now have lost track of.
Well, I thoroughly agree with this question about questioning this idea
from the left. So your question was about coming out. So indigenization, indigenous politics is right wing, very right wing, very right wing, but it's masquerading as left wing because it pretends that indigenous groups before contact were socialistic. So the answer to all the problems with capitalism is to allow indigenous groups to assert control over everything, and they will bring in a socialist system because of their socialistic, they're in fact natural socialists. That's the assumption.
That's absurd, yeah.
But what it is it's a ruse. Like, it's a way of people handing over power, and then gets taken by these what I call neo-tribal this neo-tribal kind of system.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this all over the place now. And that's a little bit what happened to me, is that, all the alignments of everything, the tribalistic kinds of elements,
Mm-hmm.
they pretend that their justice system is based upon forgiveness, when their justice system is based upon vengeance.
Mm.
So it's all vengeance. It's like, oh. So anyway, so I was criticizing the indigenous politics from the left, saying that indigenous politics is actually anti-working class and anti-socialistic, anti-humanistic, and anti-enlightenment. That's the character of indigenous politics. And
Mm-hmm.
it's all done by these neo-tribal elites, which are siphoning off the money that's supposed to be going to help the marginalized indigenous people, and instead being pocketed in the hands of these the leadership, which is corrupt, and the ones that are orchestrating it all, the legal profession. So
what I would say there is, and I'll ask you about this, is it sounds to me that despite you coming from the left, it sounded, just as what I said sounded, like it was coming from an opposite political tribe. The kind of criticisms you were raising could very well be coming from the right. And that
yeah,
they, particularly when you criticize other ways of knowing, which I find to be a ludicrous idea, other ways of knowing, and indigenous science, and this idea that there's it all comes out of this standpoint epistemology, that there's this standpoint that they have, which lends them knowledge which you can't access, which to me means it's not knowledge. If I can't access it, it's not knowledge at all. It's just some sort of mystical nonsense that's completely, it's total, to me, it's epistemological solipsism at base. These people have a knowledge that you can't grasp, and therefore, they need to be the ones who are producing this knowledge, and you must basically, what you have to do to it, you have to sort of submit to it, like really, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and I think this is at the heart of what's going on here. This relativism is because the relativism, of course, is not principled, because these relativists, these so-called relativists, assert their totalitarian position. So it's like, how can you be asserting a totalitarian position if you're a relativist? Because
this is how I argued about this.
Yeah.
Relativism is particularly open to subjectivism, and relativism are particularly open to totalitarianism, because there's no court of appeal. There's no court of appeal in the corresponding object world, and likewise, it has to be asserted with authoritarianism. Otherwise, it has no legs to stand on. And so when you have no other court of appeal, and then when they have the requisite power to force this belief on you, then it becomes totalitarian.
I think that's the reason for it. Is I think it is and I think Orwell this is why I think Orwell has some insights into this, is that and his it's called The Politics of the English Language, and and kind of what's going on with all this kind of this language which is unclear and everything, is it's a way of confusing people, so they have no way of kind of intellectually fighting back against this power grab that is being being asserted within the system. And that's what's happening with my case with this indigenous. So it's a bit complicated, because there's a bunch of people who are trying to assert power within the university system, and it's connected to other, like, it's not just the universities. The universities are kind of where it was happening first, but it's kind of percolating throughout
Of course.
the system. And corporations, all this whole thing is this kind of stage of capitalism that we're at right now, which is totalitarianism is on the move. Like it's actually encroaching more and more and more. But the relativism is what's used to kind of to confuse people, and then while they're being confused and trying to figure things out, and they can't really fight back intellectually, then the totalitarian kind of power is kind of imposed while we're kind of all in this kind of confused state. An interesting guy who I've had some discussions with, his name's Christopher Nagel, and he has an interesting, I guess it's a metaphor. He calls it the jewel wasp. I'm not sure if you've heard of this.
What, the jewel what?
Jewel wasp.
Oh, okay.
He calls it the jewel wasp of indulgent capitalism.
Oh, okay.
It's really an interesting argument. Anyway, the jewel wasp is a wasp, a predatory wasp. And I didn't believe this actually happened, but it's true. There's a predatory wasp. It goes and it feeds upon cockroaches. And it's smaller than the cockroach. It goes to the cockroach and it puts some venom into the cockroach's brain and zombifies the cockroach, and then leads the cockroach back to its nest and lays its eggs on the cockroach. So the cockroach then becomes, anyway, Nagel argues this is kind of a metaphor for the capitalist, the stage of capitalism that we're at right now. And postmodernism is kind of the venom, where we're just becoming zombified, and we can't figure things out because the language has been so corroded that we have no way of communicating in a clear way anymore. And this is kind of all these problems that are going on now. And with the Indigenous kind of file, there were a couple of Indigenous academics. They're kind of schooled in the, educational, whatever, like these educational things, and the education has been very corrupted by all these things. Anyway, they have this other ways of knowing kind of thing that they're putting forward. And if you try and challenge that and say, what are you talking about? Just ask questions, which is what I was doing. They call you a racist.
Yeah, of course.
And try and get you fired, because they're saying that you are a person who doesn't respect Indigenous people and so on, and you're going against the Indigenization kind of thing and so on. And all these administrators that are just bloated, completely bloated in the university system, they use these Indigenous ways of knowing things to kind of push you out, right? So it's kind of this kind of unholy alliance between what's called diversity managerialists, which are the administrators, and also in the corporations and the human resources departments and all these things. They're not really woke themselves, but they find wokeism as convenient.
It's a good tool for a totalitarian.
It's a tool. So it's being used as a tool by all these managerialist types, and then they kind of go in and assert power over you on this basis. And so that's kind of what happened to me, is that like Mount Royal was a very, very good institution in 2008 because it was trying to become a university. So it was really thinking through the importance of academic matters. And we had some great people that were in charge, like Robin Fisher, who was the provost, and Manuel Merton, who was the dean of arts, who were serious, like they were very serious about the academic kind of character. And then these managerialists took over the institution. And so now it's all about, whether what you're doing is supporting Mount Royal's brand.
Yeah.
which is what's called "You Belong Here," which of course is a total
You want to talk about an Orwellian phrase?
like that is Orwell. That is double speak, because it's not like I don't belong there. You don't
Right.
belong there. Anyone who tries to uphold academic standards doesn't belong there. The people who belong there are the people who, embrace the diversity, sort of stuff that is being, kind of imposed upon everyone. And, this is where we're at now. So it's kind of, that's what's happened there. It's the indigenization is a right wing movement pretending to be left wing and castigating anyone who criticizes them as being alt-right and neo-Nazi and all this kind of stuff. So all the people watching are going, well, I'm not right wing, I'm opposed to right wing, and these people are saying this is left wing, so therefore I'm going to support this left wing thing, which has got nothing to do with left wing stuff at all. Left wing meaning class politics and the idea, sort of the Marxist position, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That idea. So, which is a left wing. That to me is left wing, which is now you've got to be, and it's not even you got to belong to this identity group, because I think you're making the point in one of your interviews. If you are from an identity group and you say the wrong thing,
yeah, you're in worse
you
shape.
will be gone after even worse than someone who's not from the identity group, because you're seen as an apostate and someone who's not, who's a traitor to the cause. And that's perhaps why people went after you so viciously, is that they saw you as, one of the kind of the postmodern anointed people. And
yeah,
you were a betrayer of your, like, I assumed, was reading some Springtime for Snowflakes, that you were kind of aligned with many people who were kind of into the postmodern kinds of theory stuff.
Yeah, I was pretty much I wouldn't say I was aligned with it. I was pretty au courant with it. I was very steeped in it. So but I but I had criticisms of it. I had written an essay, in fact, you'd probably love it. It was called Academic Leftism and the Postmodern, I don't know, something about academic leftism, but it was actually written from a Marxist standpoint.
Yes.
Let me see if I can find the title here.
And then, of course, Alan Sokal, who we never talked about very much.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that actually. Alan Sokal, you kind of remind me of Alan Sokal.
Yeah, and I actually know Alan. Well, I don't I've corresponded with him. He actually helped me a great deal in my early stages of my career, because I was getting into I was critiquing the indigenous ways of knowing, and it started off with traditional knowledge, what's called quote unquote traditional knowledge, which was being imposed on the government of the Northwest Territories in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I was a bureaucrat at the time, and I couldn't talk about this kind of stuff that was going on. So I decided to go into the university system, because of course universities are about pursuing the truth, and I would be able to talk about this in the university system, whereas I wouldn't be able to in the government system of government, which of course was obviously not true. And that's kind of where I am right now. But anyway, Sokal, because I was just thought Sokal was the great, like I still do. I'm just a huge admirer of his work, because this is why I find postmodernism is so difficult. I just can't figure it out. Like, it's so difficult, and I'm impatient, so I can never actually get around to summarizing what they're actually talking about, because it's too difficult. So
you might
Sokal,
I'm sorry. Go
Sokal
ahead.
did that. Sokal and Brickman, Jean Brickman, they were kind of this is what this stuff is saying, and this is like they're doing all these word games with you
Hmm.
to make you think that you're talking about one thing when it turns about you're talking about something else.
When
And I
he
should
came
also
out
mention,
with the Sokal hoax, that essay, you know, he was lambasted by another segment of the left, of course.
yeah,
And you know, what's his name? Ross,
yeah, Bruce Robbins, Andrew
Bruce
Ross,
Robin, Andrew
Stanley
Ross.
Fish.
Andrew Ross was the editor of Social Text, and to which he submitted that parody.
Yeah.
And they went after him, and so did Stanley Fish in the New York Times. They thought it was a travesty. What he did, they said, was unethical. Not the crap that they were talking about. Not that. That wasn't unethical. The idea, you know, this kind of complete drivel that they were passing off as science studies, that was not unethical. What he did, exposing it, that was unethical, according to them. Unbelievable.
I just thought I'd give a plug for this book, which my colleague James Pugh got really excited when I took a book off my shelf and showed it to people. Anyway, this is Alan Sokal and Jean Brickmont's book,
Yeah.
Fashionable
Nonsense. Yeah. Yeah. I used to teach that book.
Yeah. So this is an excellent book for people who cannot handle postmodern. They summarize it and then they show how it's kind of a bastardization of all these kinds of scientific
Oh yeah.
And for people who are not experts in either sort of high level physics, and like this is not easy to kind of understand, and postmodernism, which is relying upon to some extent the ignorance of its audience about scientific concepts.
Right.
You know, they did great. They did just great
work. They demolished it. You know, demolished it.
And that's the kind of thing.
The essay that I was talking about that you might like, I think you would like it. It's called Postmodernism, the Academic Left and the Crisis of Capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I wrote that for a socialist group. That group ended up they ended up putting me on a cyber show trial, and basically they were gonna eject me from the party, as it were. And I said, no, thanks. Don't bother. I quit. But
it would have been good to have gone through. Like, that's the thing, is that I think these things are valuable in their own right. Going through the processes. So I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm going to arbitration in January.
Yeah, I know.
And a lot of people, you know, a lot of academics don't want to do this because they see this as, you know, distracting them from their academic work. And because it's gonna, and I have a colleague, Denis Rancourt, who I'm not sure if you've heard of Denis Rancourt.
I mean, maybe. I
interesting guy. He's was at the University of Ottawa. Anyway, his case is the most important academic freedom case in Canada, next to mine, and he lost, unfortunately. His argument was hard to sustain because it was about the grading. He was critiquing the grading system, and he wanted to bring in that for the universities and their credentialing. The grading system is like, you know, this is a sacrosanct kind of area, so it was going to be a very difficult case to win. But in the course of doing the various things that he's done, he exposed a lot of the rot.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And one of the things that happened to him was the university, and this reminds me of what happened to you a little bit, is the university, and what happened to me, university wanted to paint him as a dangerous person. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the human resources person followed you back and all. Anyway, they got a spy. They hired a spy to spy on him. And then they hired a psychiatrist to write a report on him without ever meeting with Rancourt. So it was done secretly. This psychiatrist.
Without ever meeting with him, they were gonna diagnose him.
Yeah, and they painted him as this dangerous person and used this report. Oh, I'm not sure if they used it, but it was part of it where they locked him out of his lab because he was, of course, going to be having dealing with dangerous chemicals and maybe would be doing some horrible thing. Like, anyway, it was all trying to
They
paint
painted him like a terrorist.
Yeah, they did. Anyway,
Now,
he
I
said,
gotta ask you, given all this, there's a burning question I have.
yeah,
Why do you want to be part of academia?
because I want to change it. I want to be on the fighting side to bring, and I know that it's, people say, oh, it's over. You know, Peter Boghossian, oh no, I've had it. I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm gonna go and start a new institution, which I totally understand people who have that view, but I am engaged in this to document, you know, to win. Oh, I'm in there to win. So
Yeah.
and I think I can win because my case is so strong. And I
Okay.
was so, like, I assume your human resources dean discussion. I assume you didn't record that.
No, I hadn't the foresight to. I didn't know she was going to be there in the first place.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I've been recording things since 2019.
Yeah, I mean, this is well known to do by now. Remember, this happened in 2016.
Yeah.
This was well before this stuff became, national news. I was probably one of the first victims of cancel culture.
So anyone who's listening to this, who is, doing controversial things and, suspects that they might have a target on themselves, buy yourself a tape recorder. They're very small, and take that with you everywhere you go. And it's kind of funny because on the night I was terminated, so on the wokeacademy.info website, there's an episode called The Terrorization of Frances Widdowson. I was ambushed outside an exam I was invigilating when they.
Yeah, I know. I read that. Yep.
And they tried to forcibly confine me, and they got security guards. They chased me through the camp. They painted me as this terrible threat that was gonna. And then the like about half an hour after I had been, I told the security, don't touch me, don't come near me. I'm leaving. I'm going to talk to the police about this. About half an hour after I'd left the building, the dean sent an email to 50 people telling them that I was no longer a faculty member. So it was like, oh, this horrible monster, we've finally gotten rid of this horrible monster. And then they hired some kind of therapist-y type of person to deal with people's trauma after having to be with Frances Widdowson, like this kind of thing.
This all paints you as this kind of psycho terrorist of sorts.
Yes, when I was the one who was being harassed for 5 years.
Anyway. I just have to say that, I mean, I've moved on, so I had to establish.
I'm here for people who are having in the beginnings of these things, start recording everything, right? And it was funny, on that night that I was terrorized, I wasn't expecting that to happen, so I didn't have my tape recorder on me. And when I was telling one of my advisors who had been helping me through the years, he said, "What? You didn't have your tape recorder in your pocket when you were walking around campus?" And I'm going, well, no, I wasn't really expecting that to happen. He's like,
you only think it's going to happen at a called meeting, but they ambushed.
So, but if I'd had a tape, of course, if I'd had a tape recorder of that whole kind of skirmish and everything, then it would have been great. But unfortunately, I didn't have my tape recorder on me. So that's you want to be documenting everything. You want to be getting all your things ready for when it happens. And because I was so ready for it, because I'd seen 2 other people be pushed out of Mount Royal before me, one guy who had his life destroyed, completely destroyed, who was a wonderful academic, totally the kind of academic that you would want, and he got on the wrong side of the woke, and they took him down. and he was a nice guy, and he didn't have a fighting kind of
Feisty and temperament. Yeah.
yeah. And you've got to, and so Denis Rancourt says, be ready to devote 10 years of your life to this struggle.
Yeah. See, I wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah.
I just said, this institution is rotten. Academia is rotten to the core.
Well, I'm ready for the 10-year fight. Oh, I've already done 5.
Yeah. I just made
and I am going to fight. I will fight it out to the end. And I have a great case. I have everything recorded. There's going to be no he said, she said. It's right there for everyone to listen to. And we're going to go public with this. We are going to allow everyone to see what has happened at this institution. And this institution is not unusual.
No,
right?
not at all.
And I call it, and I know you know this case, evergreen light. Like
okay, yeah, I know the case. Yeah,
Evergreen State College. For people who have not watched Benjamin Boyce's 24-episode documentary on Evergreen State College,
yeah,
watch that documentary. It is like a warning sign for everything that is going to come. And I've seen things with Mount Royal, which were very similar to what happened at Evergreen. It's obviously not at the same extent, but it's going in that direction, which was in March 2021, the Students Association, basically in response to me and also another professor who got pushed out, Mark Hecht, had a hours, it was a couple hours, it was called the loudest silence anti-racism open mic.
yeah,
where they had these students who were like completely overwrought about all the horrible things that had happened to them, with all the racism and everything. And then the president of the faculty association, the president of the staff association, adults, the people in charge, the vice president of enrollment, so like a high level administrator, with these students all like completely overwrought. The thing which bothered them the most was that, and this came up time and time again, is that people mispronounce their name.
Oh my God.
The most like thing. And then having these high level, authorities saying, thank you so much for sharing. We hear your pain. We think this is so important. The names are very, very important. And all this is like, and this woman who's a staff association president, she's crying, saying she had her Kleenex out. And it was just so emotional for her to listen to this. I'm going, this is not what should be happening here. It's like, you have professors who have to learn, 120, 150 names each semester. It's obvious that they're going to get names wrong now and again, and they're going to try, but this is not something to be having this hysteria about, which is
this is what I call snowflake totalitarianism. They weaponize their so-called fragility and use that, they weaponize their so-called fragility as a weapon. It's a weapon to control and have power over you.
Yeah. And that's not how, in Evergreen, it was the worst case, where instead of the administrators and the faculty standing up and saying, look, this is a university, you guys might have your problems and so on, but it's up to you to sort out your problems.
Yeah.
If you hear an idea that you don't like or upsets you, you need to kind of figure out how you're going to deal with that. Not all this pandering that's going on, this incessant pandering, which is actually making it worse. And I think it was Brett Weinstein who said, and I don't have children, so I don't know how this goes, but when you're raising children, and I'm not trying to say that the students are children, because that's the problem, is seeing them as children, but it's kind of the mindset. Young people try to push boundaries. That's what they do. They're in this boundary pushing process.
Right.
They want the adults to tell them when they push too far.
Right.
They're looking for that. They want to test that. What's happening now is the adults are saying there are no boundaries.
Right.
So that then leads to kind of a psychological disturbance
It
among
does.
young people.
Right.
So we need to be kind of like, this is irresponsible, completely irresponsible, not to be acting as a rational person saying, I understand that you're upset, but that is not relevant here to
Yeah.
our to what we're doing, which is to explore ideas and to be intellectuals and to try to figure things out. Like that is this whole thing that's happening is not relevant to what universities are about. And no one is doing that.
Nobody's doing that. They're not going to do it because they're using these students as weapons to control the faculty.
Yeah.
So they're taking this wokeness as a kind of tool to basically use as wardens to punish their dissident or non-conforming faculty.
Yeah.
It's just a very convenient mechanism for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, look at Evergreen State College. It's a complete shambles.
Yeah.
So they tried to hire a president at Evergreen, and they can't get anyone to go there. Because, who wants to go? Like, who wants to deal with this ungovernable situation where no one has any principles, and that you're going to be thrown under the bus by whomever because no one has any standards by which to deal with. Anyway, Sokal, who I wanted to ask you, so Sokal helped me very much in my early career and advised me on trying to get matters published with respect to traditional knowledge. Anyway, I think that Sokal has a lot of really important insights to put forward about this, because he talks about the postmodernism, the role of postmodernism in removing what he calls the rational warrant. The words that he used, removing the rational warrant, or knowledge acquisition, but also action. So like that's the thing too. So there's two kinds of sides of this. One is the acquisition. So in order to say something is true, what kinds of things do we need to have? Like how can we make a truth claim and judging evidence? So that's the first thing. But then there is the ability to act based upon what we know. So that's the other kind of problem, is we're not really able to act anymore very effectively because all of our kinds of bases for understanding things have been so seriously undermined by postmodernism.
I agree. And I wrote about the Sokal hoax and Sokal and what he was saying in Springtime for Snowflakes. And, he laid these people out. I mean, he laid them out.
Yeah.
But, I almost forgot that he is a socialist.
He is.
Very interesting. I mean, but he's a social realist.
Yeah, it's non-dogmatic. So that's the important thing, I think, that socialism, like it's orthodoxy and all these kinds of and that's what's kind of so. And I think you were mentioning this in one of your interviews, is that it has this sort of moralistic type of character, which I find so infuriating, and that's why I think the satire works so well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's satire is the only way I could approach this stuff, and because when people are beyond rationality, and they're not going to listen to arguments. The only thing you can do is parody them, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what Sokal did. That's what you did. That's what I did.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, and that's what is infuriates, like that gets a reaction where nothing else will really work, because
Right.
and this is the problem of trying to reason with people who are irrational, is
Indeed.
that they can't, like, it just doesn't, you're not doing the same thing. So you can reason all you want, and this is what happened at Mount Royal, is that one of my colleagues, Sinclair McRae, who's a very rational guy, he did a talk in defense of reason, and he wrote this long. So with the Black Lives Matter kind of episode that happened at Mount Royal, when everyone was trying to make hay out of this kind of thing in various ways, and so the Black Lives Matter type activists seized this moment to make all sorts of demands on the system, and he responded with an 8-page letter. So they wanted mandatory anti-racism training. They wanted this snitch kind of process to be put in. They wanted all sorts of resources to be diverted to, various postmodern kinds of causes.
Right.
And this letter, which was like, it's almost, you think it's satire in its own right, because this is so over the top, in response to someone being killed in the United States by a police officer that has nothing to do with Canada, nothing to do with anything. They use this to try to do this. He writes, Sinclair McRae writes this wonderful 8-page letter explaining how this is not the way to go.
Yeah.
And it's totally ignored. Everyone just totally ignores it.
Well, rationality is and objectivity and all that is all, it's white supremacist. So
whereas my response was my infamous satirical letter, where I said, George Orwell had come to me in a dream and told me that while he knew that I was a fan of his criticisms of totalitarianism, this was not the right way. The right way, he now knew, George Orwell now knew, was intersectional postmodern theory. And so after, and this is like me talking this, so after praying to the creator and doing a territorial land acknowledgement, posting my pronouns on Twitter, and adding a condemnation of racism to my syllabi, I had now decided upon the right path for Mount Royal to pursue. And I could not sign their open letter against racism, because open letters themselves
are racist.
Are part of the white supremacist cis heteropatriarchal system, because after all, the first open letter was written by J'accuse was written by a cis het man who was trying to defend Eurocentric justice. And therefore, what we should be doing, what I think was the best thing to do, was to have an oppression point system, where you got one oppression point for being male, and one for being white, and one for being cis, and one for being a full professor. And faculty members with more than 3 oppression points should take their activism seriously and resign to make room for the BIPOC scholars, because there's not going to be very many spaces in the tenured positions. Anyway,
that satire is apparently not allowed.
well, it was harassment. So that letter was found by an investigator to be harassment.
Oh my God.
It was. That was one of the reasons why I got fired.
Oh my God. That's why I say it's rotten to the core, Francis. I don't know.
The thing is that, as you mentioned, so I know you're like the Peter Boghossians, you're you're saying, no, I'm gonna create another system. My own view is that I am going to fight for what I think the university system should be, try to restore it to its intellectual roots. And I am going to, as through my battles with it, I'm going to be documenting the problems in more specificity.
That's good. I mean, that's noble. It's noble of you.
And this is going to be my new fight is going to be just, I'm going to be holding the institution to account, and we will see to what extent the legal system has been captured by wokeism.
Well, you'll see that for sure. I found that out where I was going.
Whether it is or not, I think it's still intact to a large extent. The law is still intact. It's being corroded as we speak, but certainly, the way that I was treated is very, very different than the way that the woke were treated in the system. So depending upon whether wokeism is part of the system or not, that's going to be the overriding factor as to how things are going to come out. But it will all be made public. So
that's good. The thing is that the thing is with social justice is that it is an inversion of the so-called hierarchy. So those who are at the bottom have a right to be wrong.
Yeah.
And you do not. That's the problem.
Yeah. So, but I don't think the legal system in its higher levels anyway has accepted that. And there was actually a really good case in Canada, Supreme Court case, which barely got through. It got through by the skin of its teeth, but it was a just decision as opposed to a woke decision. So there was a woke defense, like a dissent. A woke dissent happened of some of the Supreme Court justices that are woke, but the decision that prevailed was it was a just decision, and it basically said that, saying an off-color joke, a comedian saying it's the Ward decision, saying an off-color or a tasteless joke about someone who's a public figure who happens to be disabled is not discrimination.
No.
That was their decision.
That's good. That's a good sign.
But the woke dissent, which was the substantial number minority position, was that it was discrimination. So we're still there. We're still in the game.
You're still in the game. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're out there fighting it. I just, I mean, it's, if you want to do this on principle, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because it can't be for the money. There's not much, I mean, I don't know how.
Not for the money, not at all. So that's the other thing too, is that, most people get bought off. So, you take the money. So it's like, I've had enough of this. I'm going to get my cut and I'm out of here. I'm not interested in the money. So I will fight this on the principle to the end. And same with Denis Rancourt. Rancourt's decision, he's been fighting it since 2008. So he just got the decision against the psychiatrist. So for 12 years or whatever, 14 years, he's been trying to hold this psychiatrist accountable. And finally, he went to court about it, and the decision came down, and they found that the psychiatrist had violated the ethics of his profession, and he got that decision. But it took him 14 years.
Wow. Wow.
That's the kind of that's the kind of thing we're dealing with here. Is you have to be prepared, to spend a significant amount of time and resources on this. Fortunately, it's also my academic interest now.
I see. Yeah, right.
So, it's not like I'm wasting time, because I'm just learning a whole new area with which I can understand how wokeism has taken over not just the universities, and I should mention, I do a plug for my manuscript here, which is, I have this manuscript that I haven't been able to work on very much because I'm trying to deal with all these problems that I'm encountering, but I want to incorporate my understanding of what's going on into that manuscript so that I can help people understand how wokeism is destroying not only the universities, but basically all the institutions and human existence.
Oh, entirely. I've been writing about its permeation into the corporate world, just everything. So yeah, that's what I moved on to, was to write about woke capitalism and so forth.
Well, Michael, 2 hours are up.
Wow. I can't believe it.
I know, it's amazing. People said 2 hours. That's that's all I was gonna. But I can't even get into all the substance of it for 2 hours. And of course, we could go on for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, our audience, we're already draining, the time barrier here. So I think we've covered a great deal of ground in these discussions. And so I think I will draw it to a close. And thank you so much, Michael, for joining me on the Rational Space Disputations.
It was a great time. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks very much.